Okay, welcome to Aggregate Supply, Aggregate Demand number 3. As I review what we've done, it takes a long time to get through this model. I'm trying to get it through to you in 3 quick shows here. Now this time we're going to put them together, and it may not be easy. I'm not sure. We're going to give it a try though. Let's draw our aggregate demand line. Remember, it slopes down like that. And what we're going to do is draw an aggregate supply line. And when we do that, we're going to slope it upwards. And we're going to kind of be working with that intermediate one that we were talking about for the most part right now. Something like that. And we'll put aggregate supply there like that. And we're going to talk about this intersection between the two of them there. And that intersection is an important point because that's the equilibrium level of output. Because where they intersect would be there. And you could come down here and put a number down here. Let's put this as 8. Say 8 trillion. So what's happening at this intersection point? This is the point where equilibrium is occurring. There's a price level that equalizes the amount of real output demanded and supplied. So at this particular price level, output demanded and supplied is the same. And we're assuming that's an equilibrium point, meaning there's no need for change. Now, this macro model is very complicated, and people will talk about it in different ways. I'm just trying to give you a basic, simplified version to frame it in your mind so that when your professor talks about it, you have something to take to class to kind of feel grounded with. And the concepts here are easy enough. At equilibrium, where demand equals supply, the output level is 8 trillion worth of stuff. But look where full employment is. Way out here, we'll call it 14 trillion worth of stuff. That equilibrium point way out here is full employment. So what does this mean, this 8? That means there's some unemployment back here, right? Because you could be making $14 trillion worth of stuff and you're only making $8 trillion worth of stuff. If the price level were higher, these people would be willing to produce more, but these people wouldn't buy as much. So prices adjust down to this level. So these aggregate demand and aggregate supply lines are describing producers and consumers in a particular state. The consumers are C, I, and G. These are the regular people like us. Business people who invest in machines and stuff. And the government who buys bridges, bombs, and school teachers, etc. So you have these 3 components determining this line and where it is on this particular graph. And the aggregate supply line are producers, and the position of the aggregate supply line over here is determined by these things. Resource prices. We'll talk about wages and the price of energy. That's what that is. It's determined by productivity. Where we draw that yellow line is determined by productivity as well. If you're more productive, then you shift it to the right. Like technological improvements make you more productive, so we'd shift the aggregate supply curve to the right. If taxes are increased, that's a cost, and we would shift the aggregate supply curve to the left. So this is going to be slightly familiar, the mechanics of this, if you've taken supply and demand stuff, right? You're going to shift these lines one way or the other, and the equilibrium is going to drive you to a particular number down here. But these numbers are important because what is this? This is unemployment. What is this trying to tell us? Not everybody's employed. Output is low. That's right, this is a recession. You're underneath full employment here. And if we have a particular place like this, we're representing this as recession. Okay, so now what we're going to do is change something. And when we change something, guess what? These lines change. So for example, let's say the government starts increasing spending. So this is aggregate demand, a function of consumers, business people, and government, and exports and imports, but we'll not talk about that right now. If the government starts to increase spending, then demand will shift to the right. We'll make this a dashed line for now. And we get this new demand line, AD2, and a new equilibrium point. But the multiplier, if you've taken that Keynesian concept, says it's not going to shift just by that much, but it's going to shift by more as the government spending goes through society, etc. And then you end up with AD3. Look at that. So you get shift and shift. And where's that new equilibrium point? Is it at unemployment? Some, But look where it's moved to, way over here, and we end up much closer to full employment, somewhere here like at 13. This is the idea. So you have an aggregate demand line here. For some reason, it's back here. Maybe consumers are freaked out about the economy and buying less. Maybe business people are freaked out, have low expectations, or interest rates are high, and they're investing less. You get a Keynesian policymaker in charge of the government. They increase government spending in hopes of stimulating the economy. The aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. The multiplier kicks in. We get an equilibrium output going up. Of course, price levels are going up here. Let's not forget that. Price levels. So we are experiencing some inflation. You might hear some news about inflation because of government spending sometimes. Inflation's going up perhaps. But this is the way the model works. This is the mechanics of it. That something changes the aggregate demand line, it shifts to the right or to the left. We could go on and on forever with a million different examples. Oh no, the government spent more money. This has caused the consumers to freak out and not want to spend as much money. They're worried about their government's in debt, so they spend less. So C goes down and the aggregate demand curve shifts back, the equilibrium changes, and this number goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And as this number goes back and forth, different models can use that can take that information and draw it in a different way. Like here's the business cycle, right? When we're at unemployment, we're down here in the business cycle. That would be like that 8. And then as we approach full employment, we're going up in this recovery mode and we hit a peak here near full employment here. That's a business cycle way. This is the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. So what your professors are going to do is talk to you about changing aggregate demand lines and where that might mean we are. They'll talk about this distance. They might call this a recessionary gap, the distance between full employment output and less than full employment output as the recessionary gap. And so you have this difference. And then if they're talking about fiscal policy or Keynesian ideas, they're going to talk about we need to close this gap, and those policies suggest an increase in government spending or perhaps a decrease in taxes, which would increase aggregate demand and shift it to the right as well. And the equilibrium goes out to here and closes that gap, and the recession's over, driving us here, etc., etc. So you're going to have to practice these different shifting things, C, I, and G, which shifts the aggregate demand line, and equilibrium changes along the aggregate supply line. And remember, this is the slopey part. There is a flat part of the aggregate supply line and a steep part of the aggregate supply line. We'll talk about those next time. For now, I just wanted to end there on number 3 here, this basic shifting of the the aggregate demand line, and how that means a difference in output for the economy. Enough. You're going to have to come back to talk about a shifting aggregate supply line and other concepts about aggregate supply and aggregate demand, but that's a pretty basic understanding about how things work. So remember, an initial shift, and then the multiplier effect is a Keynesian way of describing the aggregate demand line shifting. Okay, enough. See you next time. Bye.